Good morning again, Watershed. We are so happy that you're here. And I want to just start by sharing a little story with you. So, July 3rd, 2014, I drove across the country from LA back to North Carolina. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I had a master's in theology. I had experience at a church, but stepping back into a pastoral role in the South just didn't feel right at that moment. So my sister, my older sister, who thinks she knows everything, she talked me into being a teacher. And so I said, I'll give it a shot. So Halloween, the week of Halloween,
Dun, dun, dun.
I stepped into a classroom. I know. As if it wasn't already hard enough to step in after the year had started. It was the week of Halloween. And that was the moment that my eyes started to open. And that I saw a whole new world that I knew existed, because we've all been through school and education. But at the same time, I saw the things that kids go through in a different light. And so whenever we talked a few months ago about maybe having an education panel, I was super excited for that. Excited because I think sometimes we forget how much church and education intersect. And so there's some beauty to that. And whenever I think about even the reasons that I became a teacher, I had no idea that I would be an influencer. But that's basically what we are. And I think about even Jesus, whenever we look in the book of Matthew in chapter 11, and they talk about that yoke and learning, and Jesus as rabbi and teacher. There's something beautiful where we as teachers get to bring that into a classroom as well. And so the things that we believe in, the things that we feel deeply about, those are the things that our kids see as they spend 40 hours a week with us in that space. And so I'm really excited for this morning. I have 3 of our local educators with us, and they're also watersheders. And so I just want you guys to quickly introduce yourself, tell your connection to Watershed, and then maybe your education background as well.
Good morning. My name is Ricky. I guess my connection to Watershed, I've been hanging around here for a little while, about 4 or 5 years. Pop in, pop out. My connection to education, I've always wanted to be a teacher. I was how you play school when you're growing up? I played school. I played lesson plans, seated charts, detailed lesson plans. And so from there, I started teaching here in Charlotte. I wanted to teach on the west side, started teaching on the west corridor, and I've been teaching ever since. I teach social studies traditionally. Now I'm in a role as the advocate coordinator at Governor's Village STEM Academy. And part of my teaching journey has led to me working with culturally relevant teaching, and I get to work for an organization. I get to travel around the country and work with other teachers and help them with culturally relevant pedagogy, basically how to be nice people, good people in today's world. That's me.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Fink. And that's funny you said that because I work in a Montessori school, and basically every day I'm I just want them to become good people and send them out into that world. So I have been here 13 years. Scott married Pete and I about a decade ago, and over that time we have been in a soccer block, and it used to be called Immerse. I'm now in a relationality one. I've been in Launching Rockets and a few others, and I just love being here. And educationally, when I first moved to Charlotte, I became a special ed teacher, and I've been in CMS for 18 years. So I co-taught in kindergarten through 8th grade for 9 or 10 years, and then I became a math facilitator, and now I am an assistant principal at Highland Mill Montessori in Noda. And we also adopted, and when living in Africa, I got a lot of time to spend at the orphanage and in the school, and really got well versed in what education meant there and in other places other than the U.S. And so have been working with a nonprofit, JoPre, to try to work with education broadly.
Awesome. All right. So my name is Chris, and I've been going to Watershed for probably 3 years. I actually joined because my partner Tommy dragged me, you know. And now, starting tomorrow, I will be working at Watershed as a kindergarten teacher for Shed Village. So that's exciting. I'm excited for that. Yeah, I'm gonna have Rochelle's kids. So
no pressure.
Exciting. No pressure.
No pressure.
Right. And I actually kind of like Blair. I stumbled into education. I was a math major in college, and I was like, I don't know what I want to do with my life. So I ended up moving to South Korea, and I taught English over there. And then while I was there, I was like, oh, I kind of like this. I want to do this. And so then I got a job in DC teaching first grade for 3 years. And that's really when I started deconstructing, I would say, my whiteness, deconstructing what it means for a white man to be in a space that is not meant for me. You know, it's not, yeah. And so then I moved to Charlotte, and I've taught kindergarten for 2 years, and starting tomorrow, I'll be here. Yeah.
Excellent. So, of course, we cannot have this conversation today without starting with a little bit of acknowledgement of the chaos that is going on. I think everybody's feeling chaos. They called it the Hot Mess Express this morning. And so education is, it's definitely being reimagined. And there's some new things going on. So there's a lot of anxiety out there right now. If there's something you could say to parents from an educational standpoint, what would that be?
I would say be easy on everybody, right? We're surviving a hard time. Not only are we educators are surviving a hard time, students, kids are surviving a hard time, and parents are surviving a hard time. Have grace on yourself. Give lots of grace for the teachers and for your kids. If they don't get it right the first time, it's okay. Work with them, work with yourself, and knowing we're doing what we can do to do our part in this whole thing. And part of that is the distance learning. Part of that is the frustrations. Part of that, all of that. But just having a little bit more compassion for everybody, including yourself. Most importantly, yourself.
And set up a backup plan. If your kid has to go on Zoom and you also have a meeting you go into, set up a backup plan, because they're gonna log off. I've been in a kindergarten and first grade classroom. They're gonna get kicked off, and they don't know how they did it, but they just did it. So instead of having them come to you to hey, I got logged off, just be go watch TV, go play with your iPad on a different game, go play with toys. It's okay.
Yes, no teacher is going to hold a student accountable for a slip up in terms of being harsh about it. So allow yourself grace. It's okay. Whatever happens, happens. And don't forget the human, real side of things. So if you're at home and, like you said, something happens, you might have to have a moment where you care for your child off on the side, even though they were supposed to be in a Zoom. There's practical life skills that we could be doing, and things around the house that aren't necessarily what you think of traditionally when you think of academics. But there's no harm in, hey, let's sweep the floor, bake some cookies together, count the toys while we're putting them away, and talk about real life things. People you might not always talk about, skills you might not always talk about. Get creative. So
Excellent. So as I talked about the church and the local education community intersecting, there's a lot of opportunity for us to kind of wrap around schools right now. So I think my next question for you guys would be, what does that look like, and how can we do that? What tangible ideas do you have for us who are sheltering in place? We're on whatever numbered day of COVID this is, and school is starting back. So what does that look like?
One thing that I would encourage is that we take a step back and understand the purpose of schools, right? As educators, we're working to make sure that as best as possible we meet the needs of educating your child, right? But we also understand, like, when we look at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs or whatnot, there's a lot of things that have been tagged into our buckets, if you want to say. Like, so we have taken time to make sure that we fed kids. We have taken time to make sure that we've given them like outdoor exercise activities and all those things. We have making sure that we are addressing like systemic issues outside of the education system. But if we cannot address those as well during this time, help us, right? So we can't be in schools, so we can't see that every child gets a lunch, right? Like, and we put measures in place. I know like CMS has put measures in place to make sure that's happening. But if there's any other ways, like any other nonprofits or anything that you can do to help fill in the gaps that are education related but not directly related to education, like figure out a way to plug in there, even if it's no more than just like plugging in into your neighborhood, right? You know, you got a day off or break, like if you can like communicate with the people in your street, with the kids that live on your street, what can you do to fill in these gaps? Because all of our brains as educators are working are like towards distance learning. How do we make this work? Because this is new for all of us. Like, I've been in education a decade, almost a decade, and it's my first year. Like,
it's everybody's first year.
It's my first year. Like, beginning of the school is so easy for me. I have routines. I'm like, okay, I know what to do. Go ahead, set this classroom up, pull out this lesson plan, rework this. Like, even if, you know, but now I'm like, you know, like, I'm working with it. So as we meet the needs of like the bare needs of making sure that we are keeping the education ball rolling. If any of those other balls roll, any of those other wheels fall off the bus, help us out.
I love that, Ricky, because I think that, you know, you mentioned nonprofits, which we all have some kind of connection to a Charlotte nonprofit, I feel like, at Watershed. But then there is that beauty, like that organic stuff that can pop up. Like if you live close to a park, could you host like kickball once a week for an hour or something like that? I mean, just a space for people to interact with each other and with kids would be awesome.
We all need help. Like, I think that goes back to your grace piece. And like right now we are struggling but doing our best. And so whether it's helping somebody, you know, on your street or locally, or whether it's getting involved and listening to a school board meeting and finding out what's going on, you might hear some things you like and you might hear some things you don't like. We'll write the board members. They actually respond. You've talked to them before there's a vote coming up. It matters. And
Take a snack, though, because they usually last
long.
6 hours.
They go long. And so, like you guys said, also, there's plenty going on. This is like a time for creativity, right? So if we know there's places where kids aren't having the same opportunity, I think that's a word you'll hear a lot. You know, different nonprofits and churches have been getting together and having meetings. Like I know of one in East Charlotte the other night where they're talking about how can we go into these neighborhoods? Do we need to rent an apartment in there and turn it into a makeshift school room? And can we bring kids in and ensure that they're getting their distance learning and everything else they need that we usually provide, because we're not just teachers. So like 658, I think Urban Promise, like a lot of people locally are doing things right now to help with the equity piece.
Yeah, and then continuing off of like creativity. So I'm going to be talking to like K to 2 parents right now, right?
Yes.
That's my heart. So Zoom meetings, right? Like what are those? Why do we like?
They are
you
my
know what I
hell.
mean? So like if your kid can't go in a Zoom meeting, I have like some ideas. Like everyone loves pancakes, so maybe it's a weekend and you're making pancakes on a Saturday morning. Like have your kid count the chocolate chips that go into each pancake. You want to make it harder? Like how many do you have in 2 pancakes, and add them together, subtract them. And you can even use 2, like, you know, Chris has 5 chocolate chips and Chris is going to eat 3 of them. How many do you have? And it's like, oh, you have 2. That's, you know, great.
There's a little subtraction.
Right? You're going to a grocery store, have your kid write your grocery list for you. Again, it's not perfection. I'm not looking for them to spell everything correctly, but if they write the letters that they sound out, that's perfect. You're in the car and you have a little kindergartner. It's like, tell me all the letters that you see.
Yeah.
A little bit harder. Like, let's read some words. Like, we can keep going. You have a family recipe that you have memorized. Like, tell it to your kid and have him write it. Like, there's so many ways to include education in your day-to-day life without having it actually feel like school.
Yeah, maybe like rethink what you mean when you say learning. Like all of that counts. And to piggyback, how we treat each other counts, right? So when you're in the store going over math with some of the items you're getting, also how you treat the person in that aisle matters. And so it's kind of like all around us, all encompassing.
I know with middle, because my background is secondary education, and I would tell, like, just in the same vein, like, when you have family movie night, like, be selective about the movie that you choose. Choose it, like, there's some good PG, critically acclaimed movies that have themes, that have characters, that have plots, that have character developments, you know? And I mean, I wouldn't script a question like that in the living room. What was the plot of that movie? But, you know, that's still a
But you
conversation, that's still a higher level conversation that you have that still supplements and supports education. And, you know, they won't even know it.
That's excellent. I hope that parents can kind of take a deep breath after hearing that you can, as you go, teach your kids. And so that's super helpful. Thanks. So one of our last questions that I want to hear your thoughts on, but we love creativity here at Watershed. And I'm curious if we could reimagine education, if you could reimagine education, what would that look like?
This was like hard. This was something I had to like wrestle with
Yeah.
over the summer, especially during the pandemic, because, you know, when as we see the height and reemergence of Black Lives Matter, right? And we see the conversation around policing. Like, I'm like, yes, defund, yes, reimagine, yes, abolish, whatever. And I'm thinking like, and I'm okay with sitting in that space because I'm like, yes, policing is inherently racist. The system of policing that we know now was built like in a racist way. And I had to think about it. I was like, well, Ricky, you coming at the police's job, somebody can come at your job as well, because education, once again, schooling, inherently racist, right? Like, when we look at the history, especially like in North Carolina, we look at the history of schooling, we see we didn't get public schools, we didn't get a standard course of study in 1898 until it was because we, right after emancipation in North Carolina, you see like a lot of missionaries and stuff coming down, starting small schools all throughout the South, and you saw the literacy rate of Black students a lot of times would begin to surpass the literacy rate of whites in that town, like especially like poor whites.
And that scared people.
And it scared people. So, and we get more public education, segregated schools. We can control the funding, how much money goes to the Black schools, how much money goes to the white schools, and these are still conversations that we're still having now. Like, these are still the reality of the system. So we have to, when we reimagine education, it's not just a necessity to it's not just something that we want to do, something that we have to do.
Yep.
Because education, as an educator, we have inherently inequitable roots at the bottom of our system. And even our system now, as we look at 21st century learning, right? Our education system is still set up to produce like an industrialized society, training kids to work in factories, and a lot of those factories jobs just aren't there anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Like, do a good job, follow directions, get promoted.
Yep.
And that's just not the way our adult system is working out now. So when we have to reimagine the whole structure. Like, I'm still in the process of what does this look like?
We really do, because that goes back to like, how are we training teachers? Like, we had this conversation earlier about what training are we giving them? It's not just the educational piece, it's so much more. I think CMS has been talking recently about not just focusing on like social emotional learning because of the pandemic, but like infusing social justice talks and all these other things. And we've just lacked it for so long, and everything was based on something that was antiquated and was so flawed from the beginning to start with anyway. And so when we're doing that, we also need to just think about the programs that set these teachers up. Like, in other countries, teaching is like one of the most valued, highly esteemed careers and professions, and their training is super extensive, and the criteria to which they have to perform and prove that they can do it is so high. So I think about how we're viewed here, and we have amazing teachers, but we also need some people to step up in the like college systems and the advisors and the cooperating teachers and really address the things that need to be addressed with teachers so the people coming out of school prepared to teach our kids are actually prepared.
Yeah, because right now, like the way that teachers like to get, teachers get prepared now is they have this phrase, and I don't like it, y'all. So it's called
Here it
college and career ready. And I remember I was getting my interview to be a kindergarten teacher, and my principal asked me that, like, how are you going to get your kindergartners college and career ready? And I was like, what? Why? They're 5. Like, can we have fun? Can we explore? Can we like see what's around us? They don't need to be worrying about college and career readiness at 5. And so like for me, I would get rid of that language, all of elementary school, all the way up to like the beginning, like to the end of elementary school. Yeah.
So that's interesting because one of the things I kind of want to get rid of, and I'm a little sick of hearing also, is there's like this visual about equality versus equity. And so I think those of you that are in the education system have probably seen it, or you might have seen it on Facebook, but at first it was like, equality, we should be treating everyone in the same exact way. And I think we've all evolved, I hope, enough to know that now we're at equity. And so it was this like visual of a little kid at the baseball game trying to see over the fence, and the one person's taller and the other one's shorter. And so then they moved to this visual of equity, and it was like, no, you don't give everybody the exact same thing. You give them what they need to help them all rise to this certain level. But then I think I start to look at that visual and I'm like, I'm really confused because A, I don't enjoy the fence being there, and not watching from the stands like everyone else. Like the whole point is to have this sense of belonging in the world and not feel like it's supposed to be inclusivity, not exclusivity. You're not supposed to be on the outside, the us versus them. And so then I saw some visuals that were like taking it a step further, and one said reality, and it was like all these boxes putting this one kid far, far above all the others, and that's so true. But then the next was liberation, and they took down the fence. And I'm like, yes, that's better. It's progress. But still, why are they standing outside of the park viewing the ball game? Like I need them inside. So for me, when we talk about like reimagining, I'm thinking, what does success look like? How do we define learning? Like these sorts of things are problematic to me because one of the articles I first read, and now I'm nerding out on you guys, but like 15 years ago or 18, whenever I first started, was this thing called the 30 million word gap. And I think even though it's so old, it holds true and is probably even larger now. Like by the age of 4, there's such a difference between the language exposure of a kid who is from a low socioeconomic background versus middle or high, and they have 30 million less exposures to language, which sets them up to already be so far behind when they first enter school. And so my question is, like, if we're talking about proficiency and assessments and what we measure as learning, and we're talking about pouring knowledge into a kid, when really our job as an educator is to be a facilitator and to bring the knowledge out and let it flourish, it really bothers me when we talk about schools and we talk about what's a good school? Because what do you mean when you say good school and when you say you want your kid to go to a good school? Because if we talk about school grades, that's based purely on assessment, and it's 80% proficiency and it's only 20% growth. And so if I could preach one thing today, it would be to really educate yourself about how we judge schools and what we push for teachers to be doing and how we gauge success with students. Because when you have 2 kids coming into a school and one is at this level and one is at this level, with a year's worth of growth, you could start to catch this kid up, but they really need 2 years of growth in one school year and 3 years of growth. And when we measure how successful a teacher is, I'm sorry to say it, but y'all, there are all these schools in CMS that you could have given the kids the test you're giving on the first day of school, and they would have already had 95, 100% proficiency. And that teacher could give worksheets and do nothing, and I'm not saying they do. However, they could, and that proficiency would still be there at the end of the year. And if you're an A school, because 80% of that rating is based on your proficiency, I don't care. I want to know, how did you grow the child? And if you grow the child, awesome. That's what I'm looking at, like high growth and high proficiency. But if you're a D school and you're a D school because you had kids come with 30% proficiency, and you grew these kids 2 and 3 years worth of growth, that to me matters a whole hell of a lot more. Anyways. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on proficiency, but like look at really how you're judging a school and what that pushes teachers to have to do when they know that their job is tied to certain measurements and metrics. And do we even need to be doing that in the first place? Could a way of judging success look different than that? I mean, I feel like the answer is yes, but
You get to say that because you're reimagining education right now. So if you were in charge, Rochelle, that's so.
I'd like to be in charge
I'd like
With
to rule
these
the
two.
world. With
in my own little world.
yeah.
I have a lot of friends that are like, upwardly mobile young professionals. They get their nice new house and they start their families, and their kids get around about 2 or 3. They contact me and they say, "Hey, you're a teacher. What school should I send my child to?" That's the biggest question. They say, "What school?" And my answer is always the neighborhood
Your neighborhood school.
I think when we talk about reimagining education, continue that conversation, I think we have to reimagine the purpose of a lot of systems that we have set in place. Like in our district, we have used magnet schools as a way to integrate our schools, right? So, like, hypothetically, you got a random kid not interested in art, like, at the art magnet as a way to escape going to the
Right. Why is that?
supposedly,
Yeah.
bad school, right? Like, that's not okay, right? In my mind, that's inherently wrong. Like, magnet schools are great, but let's put kids in the magnets because, they actually like to draw or whatever the case may be. It's not me trying to get in
It's
this
their
school
only way out to them.
as an escape method, right? Like, who's going to be that parent? Who's going to be that student to say, "Hey, this is where we live. We moved into this community. This school is a part of our community. We really want it to be a part of this community, so we're going to send our kids to the neighborhood school, and we're going to do the work to when we go into the neighborhood school, not try to colonize the neighborhood school or change it to make it look like a school that we think it should look like."
Because we think of every school as a good school. Like, what do we really mean when we say that? Like, I'm promising you guys, educators in every single school here in Charlotte and all around the country are awesome and amazing. There are good teachers at all of them, and I feel like sometimes they're made to feel like they aren't an effective teacher if they're at a Title I or a low-performing school, even though their growth is off the charts and they're doing a lot more than a lot of other people, so.
Yeah. Have you guys listened to the podcast? It's new. It's called Nice White Parents. And so it actually addresses some of these things.
Nice White
shares
Parents.
Nice White
Let's
Parents.
listen.
There's only 3 episodes right now, but it is phenomenal. And I know this can be a touchy subject, especially for somebody like me that does not have kids, because I know that parents just want the best for their kids. I get that. But one thing they talk about is the word best is so relative, like it changes. There's no set definition for that. And so I do think there's a lot of value, though, in what you're saying, Ricky.
And I'm not all the way caught up on the podcast, so don't spoil all the spoilers for me.
No spoilers.
But I've started it, and the good thing about it is it's not Charlotte, but it is Charlotte. All of those stories that I've listened to so far, like as someone who has worked at 2 schools, so we've been through this realignment or rezoning process in CMS for equity's sake, and I've within the past 4 or 5 years, and I've worked at 2 of the schools that have had this equity merger, equity realignment or whatnot. But a lot of the stories that are from New York, I could just change the names, change the name of the school, change the name of the parent, change the name of and it would fit right into our local community. So that's a really great resource.
Charlotte's still, do we really want to still be the lowest in terms of upward mobility? Like, there are major things, like when we talk as Watershed about being anti-racist, what does that look like in the world of education? It's not just on the leaders and the teachers, it's on the parents to demand of the leaders and teachers that every decision we make, we ask ourselves, is this decision on a daily basis right now that I'm making working to dismantle systemic racism, or is it working to promote? And if that's not the lens that we're viewing things from, and it's not constantly what we're thinking about in planning and lesson plan, then we're not doing justice to what needs to be done.
And to continue, pay attention to what your student is exposed to by their teachers. So you can I would question your teachers if it's Thanksgiving and they're still bringing home indigenous right? Like, question
Yes.
that. Like, that's not okay.
Yep.
You know, make sure that, like, if they are, like, what book did you read today? Like, look it up. Make sure that there's more than just white people in the books. Like, as there's animals.
Are represented more in books than people of color. Yeah. Animal
Animals.
characters. Well, that's not a happy way to end that. So, Ricky, bring it back up, baby.
Come on, Ricky.
I mean,
Save
but
us.
even with I'm the type of educator, and this is gonna sound bad, but I'm gonna say it. I respond to kids a lot quicker than I respond to parents. So teaching your kids
Yes.
to be anti-racist, teaching your kids to evaluate the lessons and the materials
And
that they
advocate.
get, and advocate
Speak
for
up.
themselves. And I promise you, as a social studies teacher, if a child comes to me and says, "Hey, Mr. Hill, I think this lesson was on X, Y, Z was racist, sexist, homophobic, whatever the case may be," you know, they're going to catch me off guard for a second. Like, oh,
But that's
you know,
higher order thinking, right?
Right.
But if they follow that up, if we teach our students, because they can do that, they follow it up with that point A, that point B, and that point C, I'm going to be so impressed. Like,
That's preparing you for life.
that's preparing. There's so many resources that anti-racism is not just something that us as educators should be doing or us as parents should be doing, but we can help our students walk into anti-racism now. They can do something. They may not
Yep.
organize the new March on Washington, but
Or they might.
Or they might, but
Who knows?
every action is an action.
And educators aren't perfect. So I think all the educators that I personally know are amazing, and they would all admit it's okay to have to say sorry or to rethink something. So when we're encouraging kids to speak up and ask questions and advocate, that's going against everything that we were talking about with Chris, with like the factory prison model of like, let's section kids off into small square rooms and walk down the hall like this and don't speak back, because we haven't really thought about, like, if we still look at discipline in the same way right now as we did way back, like, I'm going to have a heart attack. I can't take it anymore. I just need parents to know that it's okay for their kids to think critically and to question teachers. Teachers are ready to hear what they have to say, and they're ready to reevaluate their own thinking.
Yeah. And maybe that does start at home. You know, maybe your kids ask you questions and push back on things, and not in a disrespectful way, but just, you know, teaching them the way to do that.
That's a life skill.
That's a life skill. It's true. So that's great. You kind of, I was going to bring it back to some things you said, Rochelle, and then you beat me to it.
Yeah.
I love a good transition. So.
Yeah. So I'm curious. We probably need to wrap up, even though the four of us could talk about education all day. So in our wrap up, what is something encouraging? Maybe it's a quote or something you could share with our families that are watching and our watershed people.
So I have
We have a few.
we have a few. One of my favorite quotes is actually not even by an educator. It's by tennis player Arthur Ashe, and Arthur Ashe says, "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can."
I mean, that's like, we were joking earlier, pandemic talk for sure, right? I mean, aren't we all right there right now? I really battled with this, and then I went with a wise man named Nelson Mandela. And for me, I kept trying to think of like the way to encapsulate, like, it all starts with education. It all starts when they're 3, 4, and 5, and they're walking into a classroom with Chris. Like, that's where it starts. And so I went with education is the most powerful weapon. I like that they use the word weapon and not tool or anything else, to impart change on the world and to make change in the world. So that's what I'm going with.
I'm gonna go with my Old Faithful, my boo Fannie Lou.
Old Faithful.
Anybody who knows me knows how much I love Fannie Lou Hamer. She is a sharecropper from the South that became an activist in the 60s and 70s. She's like a mother figure. And she has this quote, and she says, "The men been wanting to be the boss all this time, and the ones that ain't up under the house is up under the bed," right? So she's a black woman leading in the civil rights movement. She's like, you know, we've been waiting on men, black men particularly, but we've been waiting on men to help lead us, and they're too scared. So we gotta look to other means. And in her mind, it's like, as a woman, I can step up and I can fight. And even because she was a leader of youth and kids, like, I could work with these kids and we can fight this for. So sometimes, like, the people that we've been looking to, we've been leaning on to make decisions, and place great faith in them, and a lot of them are great people. But sometimes the ones that end up under the house is up under the bed, like
Yeah.
scared. And we need to look to like new leadership, and maybe sometimes that new leadership is within us or our
Yep.
kids.
Or the kids. That's the hope right there.
Yes, for sure. Thank you, thank you, thank you for you guys sharing your heart and your love for not just education, but for our kids and for our communities and for our world. And so I'm so grateful to be able to sit on the stage with you this morning. So I just want to close with a bit of a blessing. So as everybody gears up for a new school year tomorrow, I want to share these words with you as we go. So this is to our families, to our students, and to our school leaders. Be the light of love to all. Be the light of patience when days are long, when technology does not work, when new ways of doing things just seem so hard. Be the light to shine on new ideas and new ways of learning. Be thankful for the lights of others who work hard to create fun, engaging, and challenging ways for our students. Be the light of joy for a new school year, new friends, and new ways of learning. You, my friends, are the light of the world. Now go and shine bright with kindness, patience, energy, and love. Grace and peace. Have a great week.